Good morning, church. Is anybody else away on their holly bags tomorrow? Must be me then. So over the summer, we're going to be looking at the theme. Oh, don't put that up yet. Spoiler alert. We're going to be looking at the theme of together. And today we're going to consider evangelizing together. Now, show of hands if evangelizing is like a bad word in your head. Some of us. I've taken part, I believe, in some of the worst evangelism that's ever taken place. I'm entirely convinced of it. When I was in the Haven, which feels like about 5 lifetimes ago, some bright spark decided that they wanted to write a play. Remember Jeremy Kyle? Remember that horrible program? So some genius thought, I know a way of evangelizing people. Let's write a play modeled on the Jeremy Kyle show. And let's make Davy the host. So I, without any acting ability or training, I then had to play the part of Jeremy Kyle alongside other recovering drug addicts who also had no training in theatre or acting. And we had to do this in front of the whole town hall in Greenock. I tell you, man, what indeed could go wrong? It was absolutely brutal. And I knew at least 2/3 of the people sitting there. I was pretty notorious in my hometown growing up. And I think half of them are thinking, hold on a minute, who's this? And then, after I left the Haven, I moved to Wales, and you would think that I would have learned my lesson. You would think that I would have stayed a million miles away from the stage and away from evangelism. And do you know what? You would be wrong. Because I arrived in Wales, and I was working within the ministry of Teen Challenge at the time. And Teen Challenge is essentially an evangelistic ministry. They reach out to those on the margins. I know we think of it as a drug rehab, but it's essentially an evangelistic ministry. And again, some genius had thought, I know what we'll do. We'll write a play. And you would think I would have stayed a million miles away from this conversation, but instead I was like, no, I'm in there. I'm front and centre in this conversation. So, The Journey was a play about a drug addict who went to rehab. And we toured. We had a tour bus. Saying this to Johnny earlier, we had sound equipment. We had costumes, Graham. We had all the swag, right? And we toured the country, and we went round churches, and we put on this play. Now, I played the part of the drug addict who went to rehab. Really hard role for me to fit myself into. Like, it took real discipline. It was equally, well, maybe not equally brutal. It was brutal, but maybe not as brutal as Jeremy Kyle. And somebody at the top of the food chain decided, right, the journey's kind of served its purpose. We need to come up with something new. There's always something new in there. We're always trying to think in something new in order to reach everybody outside of the church. So they come up with this thing called the Evidence. Now, some have described the Evidence as a boy band. I want to stand here today and refute that fact. Right? It was a men's choir. It was a men's choir. It wasn't a boy band. And we never wore dress trousers and shirt and tie. And we never mastered the two-step. Promise. So the Evidence was myself and a group of others, all of whom had come from a background of drug addiction. Only one of us had any musical training. Phil Buston, bless his cotton socks. He was a phenomenal pianist and worship leader. Really well-trained character. And he got put in a tour bus all around the UK with us degenerate maniacs. And it also was awful. It was less awful than The Journey, and The Journey was less awful than Jeremy Kyle. but each in their own way were absolutely terrible. Amazing fun. I have some memories from those times. I've peed myself on that tour bus, laughing. We used to stay in host homes. So whenever we'd get to a city, we would stay with a host family in the church that we were attending. I've stayed in some of the finest houses in this country. I've also stayed in some absolute hovels. I was going to say toilet bowls. But yeah, over the years, it's been interesting, which has all resulted in me coming to think of evangelism. Is this kind of bad word? Or it's a thing that whenever somebody says it, I'm like, right, I've learned from my lesson. I'm going over here to stand and pretend to be busy, because I don't want dragged into that again. And for me, Tim, can you help me this time? For me, the absolute worst offenders of all of the evangelistic endeavours that I've ever come across are these guys. Now, I want to caveat this, right, by saying that I'm sure, in fact, I'm almost certain that there are people who do this really well. Right? There are people who do it in a way that's inspired and that it does truly reach people. I've just never come across any. In fact, the ones I've seen, they tend to project out pure raging better than anybody I've ever seen project out pure raging. Aggressive or condemning street preaching, the turn or burn type, isn't exactly appealing. Show of hands if you agree with me. Flip's sake, I thought I was getting the whole room on board with this one. I mean, Stuart, it's a tough gig. Shouting judgment without relationship or compassion. I think it does nothing but alienate people. I don't think it invites people in to a deeper conversation, to a more life-giving and affirming conversations. And its worst, it does nothing but affirm the negative stereotypes of us, of Christians as being both irrelevant and out of date and out of touch. In fact, one eminent scholar, oh man alive, I should have thought about the size of that writing. One eminent scholar said this: in the culture at large, the idea that one person can tell other people what to believe is not seen as just boring or irrelevant. The imposition of belief is seen as a kind of violence and abuse. This means that preaching, to the extent that it implies telling people what to think, is seen as an act of an immoral person. And that's from our very own Dr. Stuart, Reverend Dr. Stuart Blythe. Now, I read that up here preaching, but I'm not actually telling you what to think today. I'm positing ideas. I'm throwing stuff out there for you to have a think about. For me, the absolute worst example I've ever come across of this was, remember COVID? We all remember COVID, don't we? So I get furloughed during COVID, and at the time, for those of you who don't know, I worked at Glasgow City Mission, which was an outreach ministry. I worked amongst people struggling with addictions, most of whom congregated in the city centre. And we hadn't seen some of our folks for a number of months. Those who were street begging, those who were actually rough sleeping, and those who were stuck in emergency accommodation. And this was our first attempt to actually begin to engage some people again. So I'm out in the city centre. I've got my sky blue coat on, big badge on it, it says Glasgow City Mission. And I'm walking up Buchanan Street. And I don't know what it is about Buchanan Street. I think it's the way it's angled, but it always attracts the angry preacher. It always attracts that person. If I'm honest, I rarely listen to them. I try and just give them a wide berth, pays very little attention to it as I can. But there was a young girl sitting outside the Greggs at the subway, right, at the underground. So I go over and I sit down and I'm trying to chat away to her. I know her and her mum. It's a tragic story. So I'm like, is there anything I can do for you? She says, Davy, can you shut him up? And I'm like, is it that bad? And she was like, Davey, it's awful. She said, he's been doing the same 10-minute spiel for 2.5 hours. And I'm like, right, I can't ignore this guy anymore. She's asked me to shut him up, so I kind of have to try and do something. So I engage it. I wait until he's done his 10-minute spiel, and I go over and I try and engage him. Now, the crux of his message that day was this. God sent COVID as a judgment on the world because we have turned our back on him. And I'll not get into the detail of the conversation. Needless to say, it did not go well. Right? So whenever we talk about evangelism, it's all these things that immediately spring to my mind. And I'm sure that for some of us, we share that in this room today. It's become a thing that's not actually helpful in the way that I think as a Christian. So am I saying that we don't evangelize or that we shouldn't evangelize? Absolutely not. Please hear what I'm saying today. That's not what I'm saying. But instead, what I would like to do is try and reframe how we come to think about evangelism, right? And I want to reframe it with this here. I mean, I really should have thought about the size of that writing. Can you read that? All right, maybe I should now. So I would like to reframe it like this. Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Now, just before this in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus paints a picture of a radically upside-down kingdom. He calls blessed not the powerful, but the poor in spirit, the meek, the merciful, and those who hunger for righteousness. It's these qualities that mark the heart of his followers, and that I believe leads to a really quite effective evangelism. As his followers, we're not only blessed, but this passage tells us that we're sent. It says that we are the salt of the earth and the light of the world. This means that your life and that my life has purpose. And what is the purpose? It's to be distinct and to be set apart, even if it's not immediately evident in these two. But something of our lives should look and should be experienced different to everybody around us. Now, I put a wee teaser out through the week for all those of you who love WhatsApp. Who's on the WhatsApp church chat? Did any of you play a blind bit of difference to the clip I sent up the other day? Because if you didn't, this bit's going to be really painful. Right, none of you did. Who did? Linda. I love you, Linda. The rest of you, I'm less bothered. Linda, you're amazing. So, who knows about Dave Brubeck's Take 5? Graham, my man up the back. The rest of yous are barred, right? I know. So, listen, right, disclaimer. Stuart said if you have to explain an illustration, it's no longer an illustration. So forgive me for up here dying in front of yous, but I'm going to make an attempt at this. Dave Brubeck's Take 5 is a piece of music that when written, it broke all the conventions. There's a man there. He's on it. He's like, Davey, I'm listening right now. I don't even care what you're saying anymore. Dave Brubeck's Take 5, the normal conventions of music are there's a rhythm to it, right? Dave Brubeck played about with a rhythm, and he created something that was really quite unique within music. It's become the most successful piece of jazz music ever written. It's hypnotic. It's one of these tunes that once it's in, it's hard to kind of get it away. It's dead catchy. Bonus point for the man or the woman who can tell me what it is that's distinct and that's different about Dave Brubeck's Take 5. Somebody just gestured to me, but I'm not having it. I want you to say it out loud. It's in 5/4 time. Now, I'm going to kid on to you that I even know what that is. Right? and we're going to move on really fast. Our lives as Christians can reflect something of what it was that Dave Brubeck done in that piece of music. We can be distinctly different, but not always apparent in the ways that we're different. When we look at how Jesus frames the Christian life in Matthew chapter 5, we see that it leads us to live out a step with everybody else around us, but not always in ways that's apparent. The early church is a fantastic example of this. They walked to a different beat. See what I've done here, Graham? Telling you, it's not my first rodeo. They walked to a different beat and they broke with convention. Something about the way that they lived began to spread. It became contagious even. A wee bit like Dave Brubeck's Take 5. He's all better run home a day and he's better listen to it. They lived in a way that set them apart, but that didn't isolate them. Something about this new way that they were living actually drew people to them. What was it that set them apart? I want us to look at the church in Thessalonica. Now, I want to caveat this by all the theologians in the room. The church in Thessalonica got some things really, really right, and they got other things just a bit wrong, right? So they weren't perfect, but in their early days, they were doing things that the Apostle Paul seen was brilliant, and he wanted to affirm it. So, in chapter 1, verse 6 through 8, he says this: "You became imitators of us and of the Lord. For you welcomed the message in the midst of severe suffering with the joy given by the Holy Spirit. And so you became a model to all the believers in Macedonia," and I'm going to butcher this next name, right? "In Macedonia and Achaia." I think that's how it's pronounced. "The Lord's message rang out from you, not only in Macedonia and Achaia. Your faith in God has become known everywhere." So, for as much as there were parts of this church that they got it wrong, there was something about their practice, there was something about what it was they were doing as a church that then began to influence all the other emerging churches that were around them. And Paul tells us in chapter 4 what it was they were doing. And it's at this point that I wish I had brought my glasses. Paul says this. Now, so he gives them instructions as to how they should be living, and then he picks it up here in verse 9. He says, "Now about your love for one another, we do not need to write to you, for you yourselves have been taught by God how to love each other. And in fact, you do love all the brothers and sisters throughout Macedonia. We urge you, dear friends, to do so more and more, and to make it your ambition," get this, "to make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. You should mind your own business and work with your hands, just as we told you." Why? He says, "so that your daily life may win the respect of outsiders, and so that you will not be dependent upon anybody." And I wonder how much reward we would give a church leader if their evangelistic strategy was just shut up and go to your work. Like, you'd be like, is that the best you can muster? You're not going to write a play? You're not going to drag a load of guys on a church platform to sing a song terribly? Come on, man, what sort of evangelistic strategy is this you're coming up with, Stuart? He says, love one another. Be an example to those around you. Live a quiet life. Mind your own business. And work with your hands. But he doesn't stop there. He goes on and he commends them for other stuff. He affirms other things that it is that they're doing. And he says this to them: continue helping those who are weak. Be patient with everyone. Amanda. Be sure that nobody pays back evil for evil, wrong for wrong. Always try to do what is good for each other and for all people, good, bad, and ugly ones. And then he finishes it by saying this: always be joyful. Like, all right, Paul. And when I'm reading this week, I'm kind of reading through these passages, and I'm thinking, do you know what it for me smells and tastes and sounds like? Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. For me, the way that Paul instructs this early church to live, that then had them become this incredible example to all the other churches around them, is all kind of framed around this passage. It's all framed around what Jesus taught. Now, much is made of the fact that when Paul visited a new church as part of his missionary journey, who's all sweating here because I'm talking about Paul's missionary journey? Some of you have no clue what I'm making reference to, and I'm not going to tell you. It's a season and day of my life I would sooner forget. Now, if you want to know, you can talk to me after. Paul would visit the synagogue whenever he got to a new city, right? You can see Graham wetting himself laughing over there, right? However, nearly all of the accounts of Paul visiting the synagogue are recorded in the book of Acts, written by Luke. And I don't know if you have ever heard this. I don't think I'm saying anything that's controversial. If you think I am, please come and challenge me afterwards, but not right now because I've got 20 minutes. Yeah. 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 So, Luke wrote with a bias. And the bias was he wanted to write to remind the Jews that, by the way, this message was not only for you Gentiles. Luke didn't want to leave anybody behind. So that was the bias that he wrote the book of Acts with. However, for Paul, he never mentions these in the epistles. He never actually details anything that he did in the synagogue. In fact, the only detail he gives is that, actually, I got beat up on a few occasions. That's the only thing he really says about them. But the forming of these Christian communities was central to his mission. His aim was never merely individual conversion. It was the establishment of a local, worshipping, witnessing community of believers. It was churches. Churches who lived out the gospel together, a people who walked to a different beat. See what I did there, bro? Both his ministry strategy and his theology were deeply rooted in the conviction that the gospel naturally leads us to live in community. He understood that lasting transformation required more than individual belief. It needed a spirit-filled body of believers who would bear witness to Christ in every city and in every culture. No. It's all right. It's the let your light shine before men, that they see your good deeds and that they glorify God for it. For Paul, forming Christian community was not an optional add-on. It was the natural outworking of the gospel he preached and foundational to his missional journey. The church, this church, is not merely an event that takes place on a Sunday. We're a community on a mission, the visible embodiment of God's new creation. We are a missional outpost to this neighborhood. I wonder how many of us think that way. Think of this church here being a missional outpost to this community. Established to equip one another to live as a faithful witness. We exist here to support each other and to be a center of hospitality to those right on our doorstep. How? I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. I'm just going to borrow from the Apostle Paul. Love one another. That's everybody without exception. We don't get off the hook with that. Be an example to those around you, both in the local community here, but also to those that we work alongside, to those that we learn alongside, to those who are neighbours to us. Let something of the light of who we are as people rub off on them. Attract them to come and ask us good questions. Live a quiet life. Let's not be this turn or burn people. Let's not isolate ourselves by hate-filled speech. Instead, actually, let us just display the gospel in the way that we walk and that we carry ourselves every day. And work with your hands, contribute. Rota. So how then should we live? Well, can I suggest that it's not with a megaphone or sandwich boards, he says whilst holding a microphone, but with open hands and an open heart. Not shouting from street corners, but walking the streets as people who carry hope, who embody grace and who shine light. Not by being loud, but by being loving. Evangelism in the end isn't a task for the few, it's a lifestyle for each of us. It's for the many. It's not about having the right answers, but it's about living a life that provokes the right questions. It's about walking to a different beat. So, as I come in to finish, I want us to go into this week remembering some stuff. That we're salt and light. That we don't need to be impressive, we just need to be available. We don't do this alone. We do it together, and we do it enabled by the Spirit. The world doesn't need more angry voices, folks, but it does need more loving communities. So I would urge each of us to be committed to being exactly that, to being the most loving, the most hospitable community in the south side of Glasgow. Let's be that example. Let's allow our light to shine before others, that they see our good deeds and they come to glorify God for it. Amen. I wonder if we can just bow our heads and we'll just do a quick prayer.